A 12-year-old boy steps off a boat in New York Harbor with nothing but the clothes on his back. 60 years later, he'd give away more wealth than most nations possess. The journey between those two moments built modern America, created a fortune that would equal $400 billion today, and proved that one man could fundamentally rewrite the rules of capitalism itself. Andrew Carnegie arrived in 1848 from Scotland, where his father's weaving business had collapsed under the weight of industrial machines. The family settled in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, crammed into a single room. Young Andrew worked 12-hour shifts in a textile mill, earning $1.20 per week. Most immigrant stories end quietly in factory towns. His was just beginning. The telegraph changed everything. At 15, Carnegie became a messenger boy for the Pittsburgh Telegraph Office. While other messengers simply delivered notes, he taught himself to read the clicking patterns directly off the wire. Speed mattered in business communication. Being able to decode messages instantly made him invaluable. Within a year, telegraph operators were paying him to translate their busiest lines. He discovered something crucial about wealth creation. Specialized knowledge compounds faster than manual labor ever could, Thomas Scott noticed. As superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad's Western Division, Scott needed someone who understood both technology and hustle. He hired Carnegie as his personal assistant and telegrapher. This wasn't just a job upgrade. It was an education in how American capitalism actually worked, far from the textbooks and moral lectures. Scott showed Carnegie something most people never see. Real wealth doesn't come from salary, it comes from ownership. When Scott helped Carnegie buy 10 shares of Adams Express stock for $500 borrowed money, those shares paid dividends of $10 the first month. Carnegie later wrote that watching that first dividend check arrive changed his entire understanding of money. Capital working for you while you slept. That's the game. The Civil War accelerated everything. Carnegie organized military telegraph lines and railroad systems for the Union Army. Chaos creates opportunity for those positioned to see it. He watched suppliers, manufacturers, and logistics coordinators make fortunes from government contracts. The lesson registered immediately. Supply chains during crisis equal generational wealth. But here's where Carnegie's story splits from typical robber baron narratives. He didn't just accumulate, he studied. Every business he touched, he dissected completely. Iron foundries, bridge companies, locomotive works. He'd invest, learn the operation inside out, identify inefficiencies, then either optimize or exit. By his early 30s, his investment income exceeded most senior executives' salaries. Yet he still hadn't found his ultimate vehicle. Steel was expensive, difficult to produce, and dominated by British manufacturers who'd perfected production decades earlier. American steel was low quality, high cost, and limited in application. Then Carnegie visited a British steel mill using the Bessemer process, which blew air through molten iron to remove impurities. Production time dropped from days to minutes. Cost plummeted. Quality soared. He immediately understood what everyone else somehow missed. This technology wouldn't just improve steel production, it would rebuild civilization. In 1873, Carnegie founded his first steel plant near Pittsburgh. His approach defied conventional wisdom. Most industrialists diversified investments across multiple sectors. Carnegie did the opposite. He sold everything else and poured every dollar into steel. Total vertical integration. He bought iron ore mines, coal fields, railroads to transport materials, and ships to move them across the Great Lakes. His competitors purchased steel components from suppliers. Carnegie owned the entire chain from raw earth to finished beam. The numbers tell part of the story. By 1900, Carnegie Steel produced more steel than all of Britain combined. His companies generated $40 million in annual profit, roughly $1 billion in current value. But profit alone doesn't explain his dominance. His real advantage was philosophical. Carnegie obsessed over cost reduction with religious intensity. He installed the first cost accounting systems in American industry, tracking every penny spent per ton of steel produced. Factory managers received daily cost sheets. If expenses rose even slightly, Carnegie demanded explanations in writing. This wasn't mere cheapness. It was strategic warfare. By relentlessly driving costs down, he could undercut any competitor's price while maintaining higher margins. Price wars that destroyed rivals barely dented his profits. His workers paid the real cost. 12-hour shifts, 7-day weeks, dangerous conditions, and wages that barely covered rent. When workers at his Homestead plant struck in 1892 demanding reasonable hours and pay, Carnegie's partner Henry Clay Frick hired Pinkerton guards who killed 7 strikers. Carnegie was vacationing in Scotland during the violence, claiming ignorance. That distance was convenient. His reputation as a benevolent capitalist required clean hands, even as his fortune was built on crushed unions and broken bodies. Yet something strange was happening inside Carnegie's mind during these years of maximum extraction. He was reading, philosophy primarily, Herbert Spencer's writings on social evolution. The idea that society progresses through competition and that wealth accumulation serves a higher purpose. But also critics of industrial capitalism, voices arguing that massive inequality corroded democracy itself. Most robber barons dismissed such concerns entirely. Carnegie couldn't. Perhaps it was his working-class origins, or maybe just intellectual honesty, but he began wrestling publicly with a question that haunted him. What responsibility does extreme wealth carry? In 1889, he published an essay that shocked America's elite. The gospel of wealth argued that dying rich was dying disgraced. The wealthy, Carnegie wrote, were merely trustees of capital, obligated to distribute their fortunes for public benefit during their lifetimes. Anything less was moral failure. His peers thought he'd lost his mind. You don't build an empire by giving it away. But Carnegie was just getting started. His steel empire was approaching its peak value, and he'd begun planning something unprecedented. The question wasn't whether to give his fortune away. It was how to do it in a way that would permanently reshape American society, funding the very institutions that might prevent future Carnegies from exploiting future workers as thoroughly as he had. The contradiction didn't escape him. It defined him. In 1901, Carnegie sold his steel empire to J.P. Morgan for $480 million, equivalent to roughly $14 billion today. He was 65 years old and now controlled more personal wealth than entire nations. The sale made front-page news globally. Morgan consolidated Carnegie's holdings with other companies to form U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation. Carnegie walked away as the richest man alive. And then he did something almost no one with that kind of power does. He actually gave it away. Not token amounts for public relations, not foundations designed to perpetuate family control. He systematically dismantled his fortune through direct gifts with minimal strings attached. Libraries were his obsession. Growing up poor in Scotland, Carnegie had accessed books through a private library opened to working boys by a wealthy benefactor. That gift changed his life trajectory. He decided to replicate it everywhere. Between 1883 and 1929, Carnegie funded 2,509 libraries across the English-speaking world. Not just buildings, complete library systems with books, trained librarians, and reading rooms open to everyone regardless of class or background. His only requirement was that local governments provide the land and commit to ongoing operational funding. This wasn't charity, it was infrastructure. Carnegie believed access to knowledge was the only legitimate path from poverty to prosperity. Libraries were engines of social mobility. He wanted them everywhere, especially in small towns that would never build them independently. The scale was staggering. He spent over $56 million on libraries alone, roughly $1.6 billion today. But libraries were just the beginning. He built Carnegie Hall in New York, founded Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, established the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, funded thousands of church organs because he loved music and thought it civilized communities, created pension funds for university professors through what became TIAA, ensuring educators could retire with dignity, supported scientific research through the Carnegie Institution. The list continues for pages. His approach was hands-off in ways that infuriated other philanthropists. Rockefeller built institutions with detailed governance structures ensuring perpetual family influence. Carnegie wrote checks and walked away. He trusted communities to use resources intelligently. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. He didn't seem to care. The point was distribution, not control. By his death in 1919, he'd given away roughly $350 million, about 90% of his wealth. The remaining 10% went to foundations that continued his work. He died with relatively little, exactly as he'd promised. Here's where it gets complicated. Carnegie's philanthropy was real. Those libraries exist. Millions of people accessed education and opportunity because of his gifts. That impact is measurable and significant, but it doesn't erase how he made the money. Workers who died in his mills didn't benefit from libraries built after their deaths. Families destroyed by 14-hour shifts and starvation wages weren't consoled by concert halls. The homestead strikers gunned down by hired security weren't resurrected by university endowments. His fortune was extracted from human suffering, then redistributed to clean the blood off. Was this redemption or just sophisticated reputation laundering? The question has no clean answer. Carnegie himself seemed genuinely tormented by it. His writings after retirement show a man wrestling with legacy. He'd argue that his wealth creation employed thousands, that his steel built American infrastructure, that his libraries did more good than harm. Then he'd acknowledge that his methods were brutal, that he'd prioritized profit over human welfare, that he couldn't undo the damage. Both things were true simultaneously. He was a monster who built libraries, an exploiter who genuinely believed in equality, a union breaker who funded labor economics research. American capitalism's contradictions compressed into one Scottish immigrant. His influence echoes everywhere. The modern philanthropic model, where billionaires pledge fortunes to foundations, traces directly to Carnegie's gospel of wealth. Bill Gates cites him explicitly. So does Warren Buffett. The idea that extreme wealth carries social obligations rather than just personal privileges became mainstream because Carnegie made it mainstream. Whether that's good depends on whether you think billionaire philanthropy is legitimate social policy or just plutocracy with better PR. Carnegie's life poses an uncomfortable question we still can't answer. Can you build vast wealth ethically under capitalism, or does the system itself require exploitation at scale? Carnegie thought you couldn't. He argued that acquiring wealth demanded ruthlessness, but keeping it was moral failure. Give it away or admit you're just a hoarder. That's more honest than most billionaires manage today. At least he acknowledged the blood on the money. His story isn't inspiration, it's a mirror. Look at how America's richest built their fortunes today. Tech monopolies, labor exploitation, tax avoidance, regulatory capture. Then watch them pledge billions to charity while fighting minimum wage increases and union organizing. That's Carnegie's pattern perfected. Build empires on broken backs, then buy redemption through foundations bearing your name. The gospel of wealth updated for the algorithm age. Carnegie died believing he'd solved the moral problem of massive inequality. He hadn't. He'd just proven that charity and brutality can coexist indefinitely, that you can crush workers and fund their children's libraries, that American capitalism rewards exactly this combination of ruthlessness and generosity. His libraries still stand across small-town America, monuments to a man who understood that extreme wealth is always somebody else's stolen labor and decided the best response was giving some of it back. Not enough to threaten the system that created it, just enough to look like virtue. That compromise built modern philanthropy. Whether it's enough remains the question Carnegie left us, unanswered and unanswerable, carved into the cornerstone of every library bearing his name. The boy who arrived with nothing gave away nearly everything. But the workers who built his fortune never got to choose. Carnegie's libraries still light small towns across America, funded by 12-hour shifts and crushed strikes. That's not redemption. It's just what happens when one man controls enough wealth to rewrite his own story. We're still living in the world he built, still pretending charity erases how the money was made, still calling it philanthropy instead of what it actually is. Power deciding who deserves to benefit from the suffering it caused.